With you in a second, guys. Thanks for coming along. Just getting our tech sorted. When things are supposed to share and they don't, always good fun. Right, we'll just give a couple more seconds to see if anybody else wants to pop in. We're doing this in webinar mode, and the reason I choose to do it in webinar mode is because it allows us to get through the content on time and get you guys back to work. And the other is it also helps with the flow, because I've found that when we do it in group mode for these sessions, it does tend to get a little bit, raise a hand, ask a question, and away we go. So, so as we go through, I'll try and see what's going on, and that'll be fine. I've got Rachel from my office helping us today. So she'll occasionally pop a message if all hell breaks loose, but Rachel, all the attendees will be off because we're in webinar mode. So I want to get started. As I said, get you guys back to work after the hours. So welcome along to Becoming a Vector Business webinar. This is a webinar that we've now started to really get some good value to people who are connected with our business, people who don't know us. And it's all built around this concept of awesome business and awesome life, which we'll get to shortly. So, so we'll move through at a fair pace and see if we can get some bits and pieces happening throughout. So I want to look first of all at what is the issue here. Why do we have this concept of becoming a vector business, and what's it all about? And the thing that I see is that there's three common issues happening in business at the moment. The first of those is the lack of knowledge in and around the numbers. Now, I know today we've got a couple of accountants actually on the call, and hopefully numbers aren't a problem for them, but I'll relay some stories about the accounting industry a little bit later on when we start to talk about the numbers. So finances and understanding what it is that you should be measuring and what you should be paying attention to is a really big issue that we see. One of the other things that is a real problem is overwhelm. So a lot of business owners, particularly at the moment with COVID, are finding that there's just so much going on and so many issues hitting them from each side that they really can't get a grasp on what they need to be doing in their business first. So what ends up happening is it ends up being just this mix of, grabbing whatever jumps up first, whatever urgent thing comes into their mind as we go along. And that can be a really, really big trap. The third issue is no clear plan or focus. And I see this all the time. Probably, I'd say around about 90% of the businesses who complete our Vector Business Scorecard are saying that they believe that a plan is really, really important in their business, but they don't have one. And by a plan, I don't mean a big, thick wad of paper that sits in the bottom drawer and nobody ever pays attention to it. Maybe you had it done for a bank loan or something along those lines, maybe a grant. And those business plans really aren't the type of business plans that we're going to focus on. We're more interested in action plans and flexible action plans at that, because at the moment, you've got to have that flexibility because you don't know what's going to be happening. So I want to talk about this concept of your life and your business life. And I like to think of it as a bit of a yin and yang thing. So when we're talking about the yin and yang, what we're talking about is we're talking about the issue of your business being here, and most people see the business as the dark, and then your personal life, and most people see that as the light. And you'll get a lot of people talking to you about this issue of work-life balance. And the problem with work-life balance is that there is no balance. There never is any balance. And there's probably never going to be any balance. There's going to be an integration. And what happens with a work-life integration is that sometimes you'll be working a hell of a lot on the business, and you'll be working long hours, and there'll be the stresses that come with it. And your loved ones will say, hey, you're always thinking about the business. How about you put some attention over here? You won't have time for a holiday. Money struggles might be there. So you're over in business world, you're over in the dark. And then what a lot of people come up with is they read books like, the 4-Hour Workweek, Tim Ferriss, and other issues like that. They read the E-Myth and totally misunderstand what the E-Myth was all about. So they say, well, I'm going to work on my business rather than in my business, and I'm going to go and lay on a beach and only work 4 hours a week and retire early. Now, that's a great, goal to have, but the problem is most people move towards the light way too early. And what I mean by that is they don't get their business cooked and developed enough to be able to actually pull away from it and enjoy some of those freedoms. So we originally went into business to get some of these freedoms. And that's what I base a lot of my work around, is helping business owners achieve the things that they originally went into business for before all the noise and the chaos took over. So it's really, really important that you think about this work-life integration rather than pursuing the thing that's never, ever going to happen, and that's work-life balance. Because, if you get caught in that trap, you get really angsty and you feel like you're not actually, or not capable of actually ever getting there. And that's a real, real shame for most business owners. So what we need to look at is we need to look at moving past this work-life integration. And we really need to work to a stage where we can actually achieve some things that are actually going to happen. So I want you to think, are you seeking that freedom in your business, or are you a slave to your business? And I want you to think of this a bit like music. You see the guys in the music studios and, they've got the big mixing desks. And I want you to think of it like that, because what you need to do is everybody's a little bit different. And at different times, you need a different situation. So I play a bit of music in my world. And whenever we play at a different venue, you have to adjust the mix. Otherwise, you get things like feedback and all sorts of things happening with the sound in a particular venue. They might have a high ceiling, a low ceiling, a lot of reverb in the room. Even here doing this, there's different acoustics here to what I have in a home office. So you have to adjust the mix to get the right balance. That's what you need to be doing in your business as you go through. So what's a vector business? A vector is scientific measurement that is, typically found in a physics classroom. Yeah. And a vector is a measurement that has both a direction, pun totally intended, and also a magnitude. So you're looking at something that you can actually aim and also get some power behind it. Think of, a bow and arrow or something along those lines, okay? So you not only want the direction that you're going to shoot it, but you also want the power behind it. So that's what we're all about with a vector business. Now, if you look at this slide, this is our concept of what a vector business is all about. Now, you've got your yin and yang of your business and your personal life in here. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to get you direction at speed and making a hell of a lot of impact in your business, which is something that you really should be trying to look at, not just in business to make money, but also in business to make an impact. And I think we all want to get to that stage. So we do that by this concept of creating and implementing and achieving things. And the outer circle here is what I'm going to introduce you to today, which is the Vector Business Platform, which is a structured way of going about this and actually implementing things in your business with structure rather than on an ad hoc basis, because ad hoc basis doesn't work and doesn't get results. Annual cycles is a really, really important thing, and I'll show you the annual cycle when I show you the Vector Business Platform. It's really, really important for you to understand that you don't only need the structure, but you need to keep at this. You don't build a great business in 6 months. Don't believe the hype that's on Facebook. You know, oh, we went through from you know, a 6-figure to a 7-figure business in 6 months. Sure, there's those stories of the unicorns, but the fact of the matter is business is a lot of hard work, and hopefully most of you here today will understand that. So what we're trying to aim for is these annual cycles, and this is what we call the Vector Business Platform. So what we're looking at here is we're looking at a 12-month cycle to take you from, as I mentioned, the lack of financial control, feeling disorganized, overwhelmed, not having a clear plan, and feeling like you're just not getting anywhere, you're on this hamster wheel, to actually getting to the point where your business and your personal life's financially secure. You're confidently in control of what's going on, and the actions that you're taking and the ideas that you're implementing are actually getting you those results. And it feels like you're actually accomplishing what you originally set out to do when you went into business. So we do that through these 5 areas, which is awareness, numbers, planning, improvement, and accountability. Now, we're not going to go through each dot point that I've got on there, because I want to offer you some value in each of these areas rather than this be a sell fest. I'm going to spend a few minutes at the end giving you a couple of things to maybe work together into the future on, but I don't want to get bogged down in just following what it is that we do. So this slide here is really how we work with a client over 12 months and how we help them both in the business advisory sense and also the accounting sense. Now, I often have it said to me that, what happens if I've already got an accountant? Or for the accountants in the room, what happens if I am an accountant? How does this apply to me? Well, you know, if you're an accountant, maybe it applies to your clients, but it can also apply equally to your business, because as an accountant, you're a business. And for any others who are in the room who've maybe got a really great accountant, we would love to obviously do the accounting work, but this isn't necessarily a thing that has to happen to be able to work on all of the other factors. So the numbers area of this, you'll see that there's a tax and financials there. And that's typically where most accountants work, is in that tax and financials area. So I've got a number of coaching clients that I work with very harmoniously with their accountants. They stick to the tax and financials, and then we do everything else. And that works really, really well, because that industry is really, really flat out at the moment, and sometimes not getting the time to get into this type of work with your business. So that's very important that you can extract the numbers from this. I wouldn't advise extracting any of the others, because they're all very important pieces, but please don't look at this and go, oh, numbers, well, I don't need that because I've got an accountant or I am one. That's a very important thing to note. So just moving into this, I want to talk a little bit about what your business type is. Now, for those of you who received the workbook, then you'll find as you work through your workbook, there's a few questions in there. And one of the questions is in and around what your business type is. And it actually asks, are you a go-getter, a grow-getter, or a time-to-go-getter? And you're probably thinking, well, what the hell are those 3 things all about? So for the sake of this, you're a go-getter if you're a business that is maybe reasonably new to business. You're a business owner that's maybe new. You've either started up from scratch, or you have bought a business, but you're new to it or new to the industry. Now, the important thing there is that you need to build the skills to be able to run a successful business. And running a successful business is not just about doing the work. There's a whole heap of other things. And no person who goes into business, including myself, went through a course of Business 101 on how to do it. There is no immediate training. There's a lot of little things that head around the area, but the immediate training of what you need to do. So you could be somebody who's new, startup, fresh, or bought a business, and away you go. You're ready to grow quickly. That's a go-getter. A grow-getter is a business that's already been established for some time, and maybe you've hit some brick walls. There's this concept where you have to, it's a bit like a trapeze, you know, you'll go on this upward swing and you'll get to the top. And when you get to that top, you have to jump off again and grab the next trapeze wire. Because as you go up, you then got to jump off and go the next swing. And this is a phenomenon that happens in business all the time. Some people perfect getting that next swing and do it really, really well. Others get to that next swing and they just go flying off into space. This can also be described as brick walls. You get a brick wall put in front of you when you grow to a particular level, and you just can't jump over that brick wall and get to the next stage where you can take that next upswing. Really important concept, and this is where grow-getters are. So it's not necessarily a business that doesn't know how to do business. It's a business that's maybe a little bit lost as to how to get to the next stage. So maybe some of you are in the room. Then there's the time to go-getters. So the time to go-getters are business owners that have been in business for the length of time that they want to be in that particular business, and now they want to move on to their next project. Now that next project can be retirement, that's the easy one. Then the other next project could be another style of business. It could be a totally different career change. What it means is it means getting out of what you're in and into something else. And when it's time to go, there's a whole heap of stuff that needs to be done. So you need to, first of all, with the Vector Business Platform, you need to determine what the hell you're doing and what type of business you're actually in and what you're actually wanting to try and do with your business as you move forward. So we're going to go through each of these steps, and I'm going to try and provide value on what each of these steps are, because it's very important to not just get you a model that you may or may not want to use. It's really important. If you're going to give me an hour of your time, I want to make sure that I give you some concepts that you can take away and look at the questions that you've got in your workbook. So I want you to look as you work through the workbook at each one of those questions. And as you hit each one of those questions, consider that as we go through this content, because they are tied together. I've tried to sort of link things together for you to make it a little bit easy. You'll see also in your workbooks underneath, you've got a My Actions section. So really, whether you do it during the session or after the session, I want you to note down some actions, because that's when implementation really, really works. So awareness is all about, firstly, understanding your needs. So we need to look at this concept of, well, okay, what is it that we're actually wanting to achieve here? Have we set some goals around this? Have we looked at where we want to be? I know it's cliche, but where do we want to be in 12 months' time? You've got to know that stuff. It's cliche, but how many of us actually do it? I don't think there's a lot of us do it. And the secret is, when you actually do this stuff, it actually works. Might be cliched, but it actually works. So what we do is we step into it and we say, okay, where does my business need to be? What stage am I at? And where do I want to be? And then you've got two boundaries. Okay? You're sitting there in these two boundaries and you're saying, well, okay, I've got to fill in the blanks between. I've got to say, I'm here, there, what's in the middle? What am I going to do? And that's your actions. So understanding your needs is really important. And I'm going to introduce you to the Vector Business Scorecard, which uses a number of different categories to show you where you currently are. And then give you some tools to be able to say, well, okay, this is maybe the area that I need to put some focus on in my business. Some of you on the webinar today have already completed the Vector Business Scorecard. I'd encourage you to pull out the results that you got from that and look at those after today's session. So the 4 areas that we talk about are, is your business stalled? So we're talking about like a flight. You know, I know most of us have forgotten what a flight is, but think of, you know, the concept of going on a holiday flying. Okay, if you're in a plane, you're either stalled, you're in motion, you're in flight, or you're at altitude. And each one of those stages is a stage in business. And you need to determine where you are in those stages so as you can determine where you want to get to. If you don't have any goal, you're just floating along. You're a hamster. Okay. The second thing in awareness that's really, really crucial is the discovery of your business value. Now, if you don't know what your business value is, then chances are that you don't know how business valuation is put together. So I'm going to take you through some real basics of business valuation and how the things that you do day to day affect that value. So the first thing I do when I'm working with a client on awareness is I look at the profitability of the business. So that's the starting point. So what kind of profits have we made over the last 3 years? Have there been reasons for the profit to go up or down? So when somebody as a third party is going to look to buy your business, then they're going to look at those factors when they do their due diligence. They're going to want reasons for the movements in your profitability. Now, when we look at profitability, we look at this concept that they call Ebitda, E-B-I-T-D-A for the non-accountants in the room. Now, what that means is earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization. And it's just a fancy acronym and a fancy name that accountants use to basically say your profit plus all of the add backs that are irrelevant to really working out what the true profit of this business actually is. But that would be a really, really long acronym if we did all of those letters. So what you're looking at is you're looking at adding back things like depreciation. You're looking at factoring in owners' wages, because that can be a significant one when it comes to valuations. I had a business recently that purchased a business, and the accountant for the seller had actually omitted the owner's wage. Now, by looking at that valuation and saying, well, hang on, we need to allow a commercial wage for the owner first and foremost in this profitability, that meant a significant difference in the valuation, massive difference. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars just by one factor. Now, if your profitability is low, then you need to work at increasing the profitability. If your profitability is high, you need to look at other factors that are in there. Now, when I talk other factors that are in there, the other factor of a business valuation is risk. So many of you will have heard that there's different rules of thumb for different businesses, different multiples that are thrown around. Oh yeah, 2 times profit plus a truck. Oh yeah, 3 times fees. Whatever it may be, 1 times fees, dollar for dollar for the accountants in the room. But these are just multiples of different factors within the business. Now, what a true multiple is a factor of the risk of your business. So if your business is a risky concern, then somebody's going to want to pay less for it than the same type of business that is less risky. What could make a business risky? Well, it could be that 80% of your revenue is to one customer. That would be risky, because if that one customer leaves, particularly on a changeover of owners, then you're left with a business that really isn't worth a lot. Now, that's an extreme example, but when we look at businesses, we look at those type of things. It could be that you're in an industry that's heavily affected. So at the moment, if you're buying a hospitality business, do you think that it would be risky, or do you think that it would be not risky? Then obviously you're going to pay less for a hospitality business than you maybe would in non-COVID times. Obviously there's an effect of profitability there as well, but this multiple that people talk about is all about risk and factoring in those risk factors in business. And there's a whole long list of risk factors that you need to look at. Is it easy for you to be able to sell this business to another person? Can they see themselves running it? Who is the buyer? Sometimes the buyer doesn't care about what the internal structure of the business is, because they just want to grab volume and absorb you into their structure that actually works. So there's a whole heap of factors come into the multiple when you look at business valuation. So you might say, well, why is business valuation important? What's that got to do with anything? And the issue with business valuation is that we all have a number. We call it the magic number. And we all have a number in our business. It's the number that would allow us to move away from the business and move on to something else. Now, if we're looking at moving away from the business and onto something else, we need some level of remuneration for that. To move to that next step, we need a pool of money. Now, the problem with the business sales industry, and I used to be a business broker, the problem with the business sales industry is that most people value their business based on what they need to pay off their loans and then some, to move on, to retire, do whatever they want to do. So their business valuation has nothing to do with profitability. It has nothing to do with risk. Has everything to do with their personal situation. Now, you buying that business, you couldn't give two hoots about what their personal situation is. Why should you pay a certain price for a business based on their level of debt? Now, why magic number is important is because if you need a particular number to move on to your next step, let's say it's $500,000, just to keep the numbers simple. Then if you want $500,000 to move on to your next step, it could be a holiday, it could be retirement, you might have to still put the kids through uni, there could be weddings, it could be a whole raft of things that you need to do, or you might just be wanting to buy a different type of business. Then what do you need to take from that sale? What is your magic number? So you work that number out. Now, if that's $500,000, then you need your business to be worth $500,000 to support that. What happens if it isn't? What happens if your business is worth $300,000? Well, you've got a gap. And we call that the valuation gap. And that is a real shame for a lot of business owners, is that they leave it too late to get out of their business to actually work on bridging that valuation gap. They leave it too long to improve the profitability of their business. They leave it too long to improve the risk factors in their business, which will have an effect on the multiple and therefore the price. So the earlier you can get in, understand your magic number, which can change, understand your valuation factors and how you can move the dial on all of those, then the better off you'll be. And you can bridge that valuation gap and you can actually achieve the position that you want to achieve. So that's why understanding this stuff and becoming aware of it up front is really, really important. So the next step we move on to with awareness is hidden profits. And we have a calculator which looks at the 5 ways to grow a business. And what spits out of that is different scenarios and different strategies that you can apply. So if you want to increase your profit by a certain level, then how can we work the numbers? And it's just a simple multiplication. Number of leads you have. What's your conversion rate? Therefore, leads times conversion rate equals customers. How many customers have you got? How much do they spend with you on average? How many times do they buy off you? So all of this just cascades down into a profitable result. When I do these hidden profits analysis with clients, what I typically find is I find that they don't know what their current numbers are. So how can they actually improve to better ones? So that's as much a part of the exercise as anything, as finding out what the current numbers are. So a bit of a case study. I won't go into the words of all of this. We'll be providing a copy of the slides to you. But John and Georgie were in a retail safety business. This is a client that I worked with, and they had themselves, they had a couple of employees. We urged them year after year, work on this business, measure things, what you can measure, you can manage, all of those cliched terms. John measured it in a trusty notebook. Georgie weaved her way through dealing with the day-to-day paperwork of suppliers, etc. The business worked for them, but when it came time to sell, the guy who was going to buy it, after about 3 months of stuffing us around, actually said, no, look, I can't see myself running that at all, just looks too complicated. The problem was that they hadn't built a business and de-risked it and made it easy to sell to the next owner. So we worked with them on this process of constant improvement. We put in a whole heap of things in and around systems, procedures, pricing, stock levels, getting those right, profitability in the business, which made sure that when the next buyer arrived, and they did, the business was sale ready, it was appropriately valued at a higher price than what it was before. And now they're enjoying their next step, which for them was retirement. So a successful result in terms of applying some of these concepts in practice. So now we move on to the numbers. Now, this is I could talk for hours on numbers. That's what I do. But I'm not going to labor over, the detail of the numbers. Suffice to say that you need to understand how to read a profit and loss on a balance sheet, and you need to understand how your business is taxed. If you don't, ask your accountant. If your accountant can't give you that information, well, have a chat with me, and I can talk you through the basics as well as provide you some information through some of our programs. So it's very important when we work with people on the numbers is to make sure that their tax and financials are, one, up to date, two, that they actually understand what's going on in those numbers. And therefore, it's really important to understand what you are actually measuring and what you should be keeping a bit of an eye on in your numbers, because those figures that your accountant prepares actually tell a story, and they tell a huge story. One of the biggest things that we see with small business is in and around cash flow. So I want to concentrate in terms of the understanding of the numbers just on a concept called cash flow cycle. So cash flow cycle is all about the length of time that it takes from when you actually purchase or put resources towards actually doing the work to when you actually get paid. Now, if you think of this as ripples in a pond, as you are small and you have a small revenue, your cash flow cycle's not that large. But as you get bigger in business, your cash flow circles get bigger and bigger and bigger. And if you've ever heard the term grow yourself out of business, this is why. Because you're getting too big, too quick, and you don't have the money to fund the cash flow gap. Yet another gap in our exercises together. So the cash flow cycle goes a little like this. Let's say you are running a retail business. So you purchase some stock from your supplier, and your supplier might give you 30 days to pay for that stock. Stock comes in, put it on the shelf, sell it to a customer. Now that customer, typically in a retail business, will pay you straight away. So you don't have an issue in terms of receiving the money. But let's say you were in a business that was purchasing materials to build something, then you would have your 30 days for your suppliers, then you would have a stretch of time where you had to build it, and then you would have a stretch of time where you sold it, because maybe you're just building stuff to have as finished goods. And then when you sell it to your customer, they take a chunk of time to pay you as well. So all of this is just adding to the time between when you actually have to pay your suppliers or your wages and you actually receive money from your customers. Now, if you've got a big enough gap between when you get paid by your customers and when you actually have to pay for the production side of things or the purchasing of stock, if that stock sits on your shelf and you've had to pay for it and it's just starting to get old, you're not receiving money from customers, then that's a chunk of money that's sitting there lazy. And that lazy money causes cash flow stress. So we need to bridge this gap of these, cash flow cycle to bring it together and make sure that you're understanding how long you've got to fund this gap. Because as you grow and you grow yourself out of business, that gap, the numbers, the gap stays the same, might be 30 days gap, but because it's 30 days of sales value, as your sales go up, so does the dollar value of your gap. And as the dollar value of your gap goes up, you need a bigger overdraft to deal with it, or better management of your cash flow. So how can you affect these things? You can get better debtor management in your business. You can get better stock control. You can get better workflow processes to make sure that you're getting the throughput of work when you actually need it. So all of these concepts that come off the numbers, this is what I'm trying to say to you. You might look at it and go, oh yeah, that's the accountant's world. He deals with all of that. But the problem is if you're not looking at these numbers and you're not looking at the things that are important to you, then you're not using the data that you've got. So it's really important to hone in on some of these things. Now, I've only given really basic examples there to keep everybody in the room and in the conversation. But as you delve into each individual business, they will have unique things that need to happen, and they can be quite complex. Sometimes they can just be an easy fix. But if you're not understanding the numbers, then it's all just going to explode. And a large part of understanding those numbers is preparing what we call a money map. And your money map is simply a nice, neat little word that we use for your budgets. So a profit budget, cash flow budget, and actually monitor your business against those on a monthly basis. Are we all still with me? Hopefully we are, and hopefully this is making sense. So this is just a case study about Simon. Typically we see this growing out of business happen with building companies or trades businesses, grown quite quickly. The bigger he grew, the bigger the overdraft. We worked with him on a number of these things. We worked on the throughput of his jobs, the management of his jobs, because the quicker and more efficient he could get those jobs done. We looked at how he actually manages his crews on different jobs. A whole heap of different things that we worked with Simon to help him understand his cash flow cycle and then get control of it. So understanding the gaps that he needed to cover was important, and allowed him to focus on those things, those levers that he needed to move, to smooth those things out. Pricing was also a big thing for Simon, because what was happening was he was just cycling through jobs and robbing Peter to pay Paul and really not making a lot of money on the way through, which is critical once you get there. Okay, so we're going to have a bit of a look now at planning. Planning's crucial for a small business. I don't, as I mentioned earlier, I don't like the idea of the big, thick business plan. I like the idea of an action plan. So what an action plan is all about is capturing the objectives that you want for your business. Remember back in awareness, we were talking about, well, what do you want in 12 months? That's kind of a light version of this. So what we do when we do action plans is, first of all, conduct a SWOT analysis. Most of you will have heard about a SWOT analysis, but it really is the best tool to commence a business plan with. So you've got your strengths and your weaknesses, which are your internal factors. They're things that you've got a fair bit of control over. You want to amplify your strengths, and you want to look at your weaknesses and improve in those areas. With your opportunities and your threats, they're external. So with your opportunities, you're wanting to pursue those and take advantage of the opportunities. With your threats, you're wanting to mitigate those. So being very specific about what your SWOT is allows you to then say, well, okay, this is where we're going to focus our plan for the next 12 months and beyond. Now, with an action plan, what we're really interested in is three things. We want objectives, we want strategies, and we want actions. Because without those three, your plan is just, again, stuck in the bottom drawer and not active. And we can build flexibility in with that model. So when I work with business owners on their plans, what I do is start with the objectives, and we say, well, okay, in the key areas of your business, so finances, marketing, HR, your products, your sales side of things, what are the objectives over the next 12 months? What are we trying to achieve here? And your objectives, some of you will have heard the SMART model: specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound. What we try to do is get these objectives following that sort of a model. So you can't just say, well, okay, my objective is to increase sales over the next 12 months. Well, that doesn't mean a lot. So what we want to ensure is we want to ensure that we know exactly where we're wanting to take sales and by when. So that's our objective, might be to increase sales by 15% on last year by 30th of September 2022. Does the date matter for a business plan? No, it doesn't. You don't have to tie your business plan to a calendar year or a financial year. If you don't have a plan, get started now. Don't leave it until the clock ticks around to a predefined date. Doesn't matter. So once you know your objective and we're saying, well, okay, we want to increase sales 15%, then we need to come up with how we're going to do it. And that's the strategy. Now, the strategy isn't every particular task that you need to do to make it happen. That's the actions. The strategy might be, well, okay, we're going to look more at our social media strategy. That could just be one. Could be pricing. Might be another strategy. We're going to look at our pricing model and get our 15% just purely through pricing. Now, then you need to look at your actions once you come up with your strategy. So your actions are the tasks that have to happen. So if we're looking at social media strategy as an example, then your actions might be to get 3 quotes from social media agencies, digital marketing agencies. It could be to design a content calendar and produce a wealth of content ahead of actually spending money on an agency to place stuff for you. So all of these strategies have a person that's going to be responsible. All of these actions, sorry, have a person that's going to be responsible and also a date that it needs to be done by. And that ensures that it gets done. Now, your action plan is not 50 pages of waffle. It's normally turns out, when I do one for a client, normally turns out around about 20 pages because we load a lot of actions in there. But what you're wanting is you're wanting something that is actually meaningful, that you can start ticking these actions off and implementing, because a business plan without implementation is a waste of time, waste of money. Don't bother doing it. It really is a waste of money. Now, when you do your action plan, whether it's in the design of your action plan, which I'd encourage, or whether it's after that, you need to get your team on board. Because if you don't have your team on board, then it's just you shouting from the rooftops what you want to happen. And that's a really bad way to lead your team. So by all means, come up with the overall objectives of what you need to happen, but engage your team because they're at the coalface. They know what's doing. Once you've got through all of this, in planning, we work with clients to protect what they've built. So you also need to plan around different structures that you have, looking after asset protection, looking at succession planning ongoing. This is really, really crucial. I've had clients in recent years where key members of the business have become ill or suffered a tragedy. And it basically pulls the wool straight out from under that business, and nothing can be done about it after the fact. It can only be done before the fact. And now's the time to get into that. There's currently, just while we're on that, there's currently a thing happening in the income protection industry. So any of you who don't have income protection, please reach out to me because we've got some contacts that are looking at this for clients at the moment. And it really is an area that they possibly need to have looked at because the rules are going to change and it's going to make it a lot less beneficial after the 30th of September than what it is now to have a policy in place. It's the government getting involved, APRA, etc. Got a little bit off track there. Bit of a case study, quick one here. Keith had an independent grocery store. This goes back a few years. I've worked with this business now. But this was really, really funny. We did 2 days. We did one day, which was a strategic planning day with Keith and his wife, and formulated a plan. And back in those days, we did much bigger plans. Now we do it quite efficiently. We don't spend a whole day now. We do about a 3-hour session. And part of this process was a mystery shop. We did a session with Keith, and we put in place a session the next day with his team. Now, the morning after was a Saturday. So picture this, in a seaside town on a Saturday, Keith's team consisted of 5, 16 to 18-year-olds coming in on a Saturday morning. Now, you can imagine what the night was the night before. Small town, teenagers. His team walked in, they're all bleary-eyed, they're like, oh, what have we got to be here for, etc. I thought, oh my God, this is going to be hard yards. Couldn't have been further from the truth. This team just pitched in and threw so many great ideas out. It was just gold, the stuff that they came up with. And rather than it just be a waste of time, they came up with strategies around dealing with waste, shop fit out, rostering, whole range of things. And there was more strategy done with them than what I did with Keith and his wife the day before. And it really brought the plan together. So by all means, get your team on board because they know what's going on in your business, particularly if you've been out of it for a little bit, concentrating on this sort of stuff. We then move on to improvement. And improvement, once we've moved through each of those other steps with a business, or you're following along at home and you're doing this yourself, trying to bring it all together, which is tough. You know, you can't build a business with Gary V videos and YouTube, do-it-yourself videos. It just can't happen. You've got to engage professionals who've been doing this stuff. You know, I've been doing this for 20 years. I live and breathe this type of work, and those insights that I've gained from working with over 1,200 business owners, they're worth their weight in gold, and you can't get that out of a YouTube video or something on Google. So improvement brings all of those threads that we've been talking about with the awareness, the numbers and the planning, brings all of those together, because once we've got a plan in place, we can then start to look a little bit deeper into the business, and we can start to consider things like, okay, where is the business going well? Where is the business maybe floundering? Of the things that we thought we had in our plan, which were going to work, of those things, what are now working, what's not, and how do we adjust it? Now, the first thing we do in improvement, and the first thing you should do in your business, and it's in your notes, to look at what the top systems and procedures that you can implement in the next 3 months are. We all think that our business works smoothly and like clockwork, but what things happen in your business regularly that you don't have a procedure for? Find some important ones and put a system and a procedure in place. Now, I don't mean a document that has to be followed to the letter. It needs to be something that's going to be used by you and used by your team. Even if it's a flow chart for people to be able to understand how the process works, because just because you do doesn't mean that your team do. Do you ever get this when you ask your team a question? Yes. Yeah. When they have absolutely no idea what's happening. So what we need to do is we need to get these systems and procedures happening in your business and document things. You don't have to do it like some glossy magazine. Just get them written down and get them put in place. And then we can start to manipulate and move things and make them into an online repository of information. You don't have to do that. Get things written down and make sure that you can use them. I've had businesses before where systems have been put in place by others, by consultants. They've done a fancy system, handed it to them, charged them a fee, and then moved on. And the business owner's gone, look, this just doesn't work in practice. You need to be involved. Your team need to be involved. I'm going to talk about managing change with a case study. But what improvement is all about is looking at what works, or what's working, what isn't, and then adjusting. And we do that on a monthly basis. So when we coach businesses through our Vector Business platform, we work on a monthly basis with them to have an improvement meeting. So we have one improvement meeting in a fortnight, once a month. And then on the alternate fortnight, we do accountability, which I'll talk about in a second. So it's important with change because we don't like change. As humans, we just don't like change. And this can really put a barrier on your improvement activity. So wanted to have a look at this case study. This was Cheryl. Cheryl was a client of mine. Unfortunately, Cheryl's no longer with us. But Cheryl was a lovely person. But she lacked confidence. She was a bit old-fashioned, a bit of a ditherer. And as part of Cheryl's improvement session, we were working on her conversion rates from quotes. And basically, these things have just fallen off a cliff. And I said to Cheryl, I said, look, why aren't you converting your quotes? What's going wrong? And Cheryl pointed me to the filing cabinet in the corner of the room. And this was full of quotes that hadn't been followed up on. Now, I could have given Cheryl a script to follow. I could have basically said, get on the phone and have a crack and get stuck in and follow up the quotes. Problem is it wouldn't have made any difference. You know, this filing cabinet over in the corner was like a fire-breathing dragon to Cheryl. And no matter what I said was not going to make her improve. The fact of the matter is that it turned out that Cheryl had lived her whole life under this shadow of criticism and rejection. And starting as a child, she basically had been, you know, pilloried with all of these bits and pieces. She had parents abandon her, a marriage where she was told she was constantly wrong. She was sitting at a desk and just looking at this filing cabinet, totally afraid. So we had to do some significant and confidential work with Cheryl. We were able to use a version of what's called timeline therapy. So taking Cheryl back a few steps in her journey and finding out what was triggering these things and getting her to the point where we were able to use the tools that we've got in our tool belt from a coaching perspective. We don't always use them, but we were able to use those tools to give her the knowledge that her customers would actually be more upset if she didn't follow up the quotes than they would be if, you know, she did ring them. And that's what she was afraid of. So after all, the clients are the ones who asked her for the quote. So we were really trying to encourage her to think of it in that way. And this made a monumental change for Cheryl in her business. As I said, she's no longer with us now, but this was a real crucial point and a turning point for her in the business. So that's how you deal sometimes when you need to manage the change a bit better and get people through. I want to talk quickly about some accountability structure here. What to measure and when. So I used to have a client who provided a spreadsheet of all of the things that they measured in their business. I was quite proud of his spreadsheet, multicolored, you know, 1,001 different cells and formulas, different tables, etc. It was a work of art. Problem is he was measuring so many things that it was totally meaningless. He was spending so much time measuring. And they say what you can measure, you can manage, but sometimes you just measure too much. So you really need to find out the specific things that you should be measuring that drive your business, know when to measure them. We like to get our clients on a monthly accountability session, like I mentioned before. One fortnight we do improvement, the next fortnight we do accountability. And those sessions that we do for accountability hold you to those numbers. And if those numbers aren't going the right way, we dig deeper and we find out why they're not going the right way. But those numbers have to be meaningful. We look at getting business owners unstuck as well, because you can get into this whole plan and improvement phase, but like Cheryl that we just spoke about, you can just become rigid and frozen and stuck and really not achieve the things that you need to achieve. And we work on that with some of the NLP tools, neuro-linguistic programming stuff. I don't like to lead with that because there's so many coaches out there, you know, who are out there plugging that stuff, but they don't know anything about the numbers. And that's what makes our services really, really different, is that we lead with the numbers and then back it up with those skills to be able to get people out of what I like to call unstuckedness. So I wanted to use a bit of an example of this carrot or stick approach. I often say to people that my style is a cross between Gordon Ramsay and Mother Teresa. And that sounds silly, but it's true in terms of the way that we have to approach different clients, because some respond to the stick and some respond to the carrot. It's a bit like a thoroughbred horse. You know, I think a thoroughbred horse around about 350 kilos, carrying a 40 kilo jockey, is doing about 65 k's an hour, with about 12 other horses around it. So you think if you need to move that horse, then sometimes just giving it a little rub on the ear is not going to work. It's got to have a bit of persuasion in the process. So that's the Gordon Ramsay approach, the stick approach, as opposed to at other times, the horse is going to respond to more softness and those type of attitudes, but not when you've got 12 horses around you and you've got to move. Otherwise, as a jockey, you're just going to get squished. And that happens. Or the horse gets caught going through, and then horrific things like horses getting put down, etc. happen. So that's what we're talking about carrot and a stick. So here's an example of what I do when I'm using the stick approach. And this actually happened with a client of mine. So we were talking about their cash flow. Cash flow is tight, I'm too busy. My response was, well, okay, let's have a bit of a look at your job board. And they said, well, okay, this is how I keep track of things. This is what stage each job's at. I said, well, okay, where's this one up to? Oh, look, I'll have to check. What about this one? Has that been invoiced? Look, I'll need to get onto that one. That hasn't, I haven't got the invoice done there. At which point I just grabbed all of these things that were on the job board and just got rid of them all and said, look, this has got to change. Now, the client sort of just sat back and went, whoa, what just happened? But that stick approach and the conversation that followed was quite intense. The issue was that the client just was saying yes to everything that came in the door and letting people down. They had so much on that they were disappointing more people than ever by saying yes all the time. So the client actually rang me about half an hour after this session and said, look, that really shook me up. But the fact is that that's what was needed. The stick approach was needed in this circumstance. Contrast that to an accountant that I was working with in Victoria, where if I'd have used the stick approach with them, they just would have gone, whoa, and run. So what we had to do was we had to, in their case, they were doing so much of the core work and not getting anywhere, not getting onto the work that they wanted to do, but they had a team there ready to do all of this work, but they weren't letting go and getting the team involved. So we had to point out to them the consequences of that and use a bit of a carrot approach to say, well, okay, look, if you don't want to move, that's fine. But if you don't move, this is going to be the financial consequence of this. So how about we put things in place bit by bit by bit by bit? And we have to take that softly approach with some clients because they react differently. So is it carrot or the stick? Which one do you prefer? Do you need a carrot approach or do you need a stick approach? If you need either of those, then you need to get an accountability partner, such as a coach, to help. Does it make sense? Hopefully. So I want to just check in. And when I say check in, I mean you need to check in with yourself. You need to ask yourself, well, okay, where am I at on this business journey? Where am I at the moment? What have I been doing the last 12 months to 24 months? And yes, we've had COVID, and yes, we could lean on that, but what are we doing in our business? Are we really making inroads into all of these key areas? And when you check in with yourself, don't just look at your business, but also look at your personal life. Are you achieving the things that you want to be achieving in your personal life? Remember, it's this integration. Your business is the enabler for your personal life. It gives you units of choice. That's all money is. Your personal life, depending on how you're going in your personal life, will in turn affect your business. So it's very important for you to check in with yourself now, have a look at what we've discussed, and really ask yourself, is your business where it should be? And if it's not, what are you going to do about it? So bringing all of this together is the purpose of that 12-month cycle of the Vector Business Platform. By running through a 12-month cycle, you can go through awareness, go through your numbers, get your plan in place, then you look at your improvement and your accountability. And what happens is we work through those first number of sections, so the awareness, the numbers, and the planning. Those sections there are the cornerstone of the first 3 months together. Then when we move beyond that with a Vector Business Platform client, we then start looking at improvement and accountability in those fortnightly meetings, and that goes on for the next 9 months. Now, does that mean that the plan never changes? No, the plan's flexible. But what it does mean is it does mean that we've worked through that core information up front, and then we move into the rest. Now, as I said before, if you're in a position where you don't need the tax and financials part of the numbers, well, we lean more on the numbers that you should be measuring, getting your KPI stuff in place, getting your budgets and your money maps in place, and then really working. We also do a lot in terms of the automation of your bookwork. So that becomes important. So depending on the type of business that you are, depends on what you need from that module of the Vector Business Platform. Once you get to the end of your 12 months, we then go back to awareness and we do a new business valuation to see what has moved in terms of de-risk and profitability, because hopefully each of those have improved as you've worked through the other modules. And then we actually start the process again. So we then go back to the numbers. What's changed there? What do we need to be working on in the numbers? Let's get new budgets in place. Let's measure new numbers that have popped up as things that we want to be able to manage. Let's move on to a new plan, put a new plan in place for the next 12 months. And then we move on to improvement, accountability again. And you just keep cycling through these 12 months to achieve what it is that you're wanting to do and move you from go-getter, grow-getter, time to go-getter. Does that make sense? Hopefully it does, because we're wanting to move you through the ranks. So hopefully these tools, they all fit together. So I'd really encourage you to have a look at each one and work your way through. Just to summarize the tools. So coming up, due for release February, March next year, just putting the final touches on the manuscript now, is the book, Awesome Business, Awesome Life. It's an ambitious business owner's guide to control, consistent and rapid growth. Some interesting facts. We're taking pre-orders December 21 if anybody's interested. Interesting facts. Took about 104 days to write, 163 hours. 20 years of know-how has gone into this book. And as you can see from the mock-up of a cover, I've got zero graphic design skills. So I'll leave that one to the professionals when the time comes. As we move forward, we've also got the podcast. Now, with the podcast, every business needs a hero. Those of you who have either been on or listened to the podcast will know the format. Basically, we do a hot topic on a business subject. We then go through a hero story with a business owner who's really achieved some things. This one here is Carl Schwantes from Xenox Diamonds. We've got plenty of others that have done our hero story. And then we do some other features in terms of a quick question and some other wrap-ups. So it takes about an hour each episode, and really good to jump on and listen. You can get it through Spotify or Apple Podcasts, or via our website for that matter. This one here is our Vector Business Score. Now, the Vector Business Score is an online questionnaire which you can fill in. It takes around about 3 to 5 minutes. It gives you a ranking in those 4 areas that I mentioned. So the stall, the in motion, the in flight, the at altitude. And each of those levels has different things that you need to be focusing on. So it scores you on where you're at in terms of awareness, numbers, planning, improvement, accountability. Gives you an overall ranking score, and then gives you a bit of a blurb as to what you need to be doing next and where you need to be going. So that's the Vector Business Scorecard. A link of that will be in the email following this webinar. But the big one that I wanted to mention was the Balanced Business Program. So you might be thinking, well, okay, that's great. I really don't want to move, though, to the full Vector Business Platform model yet. I really don't think that, 1, the business is at that stage, or 2, that the expense is in line with the value that you would currently get. Now, I can tell you that the value you would get from Vector Business Platform is massive, but we get that not every business is at the same level. So we've put in place the Balanced Business Program as a bit of a stepping stone for you to be able to go from where you are now at the webinar and becoming aware of these concepts, and then moving you through to a better state where you can attack it from a vector business platform perspective. So what's included as part of the program? It's a 2-monthly group online program to try and get this to you at the correct price point. But that doesn't mean that it's just a whole heap of videos. Otherwise, we land back in Google, YouTube land. So what we're doing is a weekly live session with the group where you'll be able to throw your problems into the group, and we'll be able to solve those, and we'll do a little bit of theory stuff as well to bring your knowledge to the level that it needs to be. That will be based around those 5 pillars of the vector business platform. We're also going to design some self-paced video content around that as well. So you'll get access to that to be able to do in your own time. So you're not having to turn up at a specified time when you might be busy in your business. You can watch it at 2 o'clock in the morning if you want to. Not that I would encourage that. Now, normally $3,500 for this program. I'm not going to throw in a set of steak knives, but what I am going to do is say that if you express interest today in this program, then I will honour a price of $2,700 for the full program for being here on this webinar today. Alternatively, I'll honour a price of 3 monthly instalments of $1,000 to help with COVID cash flow, as I call it. So really good offer, massive value in that. To give you an idea, working on the full vector business platform, you're probably looking about $2,000 a month minimum. So to get access at this level is just a price that I won't repeat beyond participants of the Becoming a Vector Business webinar. So if you want to jump on that, when the email comes through, have a look at the larger document, which will give you a lot more detail. Once you've been through that, if you've got any questions, get in touch. Otherwise, just shoot me back an email and say, hey, David, I'm in for the Balanced Business Program, and we can start to link things together. And we're kicking this off probably in about 4 weeks from now. So look, thank you for sticking with us, and I hope you have a great day ahead for the balance of it. And hopefully we'll be talking soon, either Vector Business Platform wise or the Balanced Business Program, and helping your business achieve the things that you originally set out to do. Thanks, guys.